Welcome, everyone. It's a real pleasure for me today to welcome JB Harris, my friend Jen, to today's edition of Rupa's Six Questions for Authors. I'm Roopa Unikrishnan, Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer by day and author the rest of the time. I'm now a crime fiction author as well, and that role has inspired me to ask six questions of all my writerly friends that examine the intersection of analytical rigor and creative storytelling. Jen's book captures just one of those interesting times. It's set in that liminal space between the world wars. In 1913 Boston, a middle class girl falls in love with a Greek immigrant. They buck society, defy her parents, elope, but then tragedy strikes and they must give up everything, including each other, for the sake of their love and for their child. It's so fascinating. Jen, tell us more about the book, a little bit about you, and hold up the book. I want to see it.
I will do all of those things. First, I want to thank you so much for having me on. This is the book, The Immigrant's Wife, and this is my debut novel. Prior to writing this, I have been published in the short fiction space, but I came across a family history mystery. I was in my late 20s, and I learned from emptying out my grandmother's house while she was moving. I came across a christening certificate that was written with a fountain pen that had her last name as Patrinos instead of Patrons, which is what we all thought her maiden name was, including her. So she never knew she was Greek. And when I started asking questions, she said to me, my father left when I was 2. And I said, what do you mean he left when you were 2? I thought I knew who he was. Well, no, I knew her stepfather. So I did a lot of family history research to find out what happened to him. And when I did, I read it, what I've learned, as less a husband goes out for milk and never returns story, and more of a heroic tale. And so I wanted to tell fictionally, because it is complete fiction. All the names are correct, but the facts are different. So I wanted to tell a fictional story from a man's point of view that didn't paint him as a villain.
Amazing. So that's the origin spark, right?
Yes.
So you then decided on an interesting pathway. You kept the names the same and the facts were fictional, which is very different from my approach, which has been to tell the facts but use very different names. That's really interesting. What drove that choice? Was it because it was a homage to the family? Like what was going on there?
If I'm completely honest, I think it was just in the beginning to keep everybody straight, because these, for the most part, were relatives I were already deceased by the time I was writing about them, with the exception of my grandmother. So in order to remember who everybody was, I wanted to keep the names the same. And I thought eventually I would change them. But by the time we got to publication, these were those people to me. So I wasn't ready to just slot in a new name. And I thought, as you said, it's a little bit of an homage to the people who went before me.
Amazing, amazing. So, talk to me a little bit about the process ritual. You're somebody who's taken the time to actually learn how to write through, programs, etc. Unlike me. So what is writing this book actually look like for you? What's your typical day? Not that romanticized version we sometimes hear, but the truly the real one. What does the work honestly look like?
Oh, it's been difficult. It's taken a very long time. I've done this over the span of 10 years. My kids were young. I was working, and like a lot of us, had to fit in time. So it was about 3 hours a day, once a week, when I had the ability to go out and write somewhere where it was quiet. Now I have the benefit of being a full-time author, and I do write many more hours. I try to spend about 4 hours a day on my writing. If I'm not romanticizing it, a lot of that gets spent on the phone, checking out TikTok or posting because you do need to promote, right?
Right.
Or doing my laundry. Most writers know that every single chore suddenly becomes the most important thing in the world when you have the time to sit down and write. So I'm very ritualistic. So I do like to set up my space, have my coffee, have my candle. I tend to write most of my first drafts longhand
Wow.
and then to and then to type them into the computer. That's sort of my automatic way of editing. And then we just go from there with discipline and perseverance.
Wow, that is so unusual, I want to say, but I'm hearing more and more of people like, writing, truly having pen in hand and then, transforming those ideas. That's pretty amazing. So you touched upon this, but the day job tension is what I call it, which is, in essence, you now are this is your day job, but even in the past, writing and your professional life exist in the same brain, right? And so what is writing
Yes.
done for the rest of your life? And what have you done? What has the rest of your life done to your writing? Like, what is it taught? What is it? How has it evolved your writing?
I think originally it was really a process of trying to compartmentalize, especially writing a story that takes place in 1913 Boston. When you're doing that it was around 2010, probably a little later than that when I started it, I would have to put the phone away. I would have to sort of get into that headspace of, I'm on the phone all day for work, but they didn't have cell phones. They didn't have computers. They didn't have all the things that we did. So there was a lot of trying to compartmentalize and just sort of zoom back into 1913. Um, and of course, working a full time job and raising a family does put writing in odd hours and it does make it take longer, at least in my life. Now it's very different. Now I would say that, writing really feeds my soul. It gives me purpose now that I'm not working a full time job and I am about to be an empty nester coming on September. I
Congratulations.
see a, thank you. I see a lot of my colleagues or my neighbors who are finding themselves trying to find a part-time job after staying home to raise the children or going back into the workforce or feeling like, well, I can't fit back into the workforce. I've been gone too long. And for me, I have no need to do any of that. I want to sit at my desk. I want to write. Um, since becoming published, it has really felt more like a full-time job and also like, a passion project. I just absolutely love what we do.
Yeah, I can feel that. I just think that I'm a step away from this being my full-time job, and so I'm extremely envious. Can I ask you, this is the next fourth of my questions. I call it the abandoned idea. What's a book or a storyline that you started, got kind of deep into, but then walked away from? What does it say that you can't yet finish it? I would say I never say will not finish it because sometimes it's just a timing issue, right? So, but what does it say about you,
Right.
about the story?
So, what comes to mind when you ask that question is the very first novel that I tried to write in my writing the novel class back in the 90s. That's how long ago that was. And it was titled Tackling Asparagus. And I had done a stint at the Castile Well in the Netherlands and learned that it took 7 years to grow white asparagus. And I thought that was such a neat fact. And I decided that I was going to write some sort of relationship story, not necessarily a love story, but something that would take a 7 year stint, because I just thought that was such a neat fact. I probably got, I don't know, maybe a third of the way into it and realized I really had nothing more than a neat fact about asparagus. And I had to abandon it because none of the characters were fleshed out. I didn't have a storyline that I really wanted to write about. I just thought it was a really neat thing. That fact about asparagus taking 7 years. And I think what that probably says about me as a writer then is that I was young, I was naive,
Right,
and I hadn't really lived enough
right,
to talk about real relationships and things that might take 7 years to, whether that's a marriage or having children or a divorce or whatever it might have been. I just didn't have enough experience with
right,
life
right,
to put into a story like that.
right. So it may come back one day, huh?
It I don't think so, but it might. You never know.
So now let's switch to the book you've written already, the book you're writing. What is in your mind sort of the shelf test, right? What do you consider when you finish a book? What's your internal sense of whether you've succeeded in the metrics that you've set out, right? What is your personal measure of success? And for you, for The Immigrant's Wife, do you feel like it's met that, exceeded that measure? How would you consider it?
That's a really interesting question. I think every draft I write, I think is brilliant until I realize it's not. So, you know, figuring out when it really works for me took a long time. And what I've discovered is it's when I've run up against a wall, I can't think of anything else I want to do to make it better. I've workshopped it with other writers who know what they're doing and can say to me, this character isn't working, this plot line isn't working, I don't believe this needs to be fleshed out. When I get to a point where the information that's coming back to me either doesn't hit me in the right way or is just, this one doesn't like the character, but this one does. This one doesn't like the storyline, but this one does. Then I realize it's done. It might
Mm,
take a little bit more tweaking, to line edit and that sort of thing, but then it's done. Um, as far as The Immigrant's Wife goes, as a young writer, I had dreams of being on the New York Times bestseller list and the Today Show and Oprah's book club. Um, I think we all have learned that that is very, very hard to come by in this industry. Fewer and fewer people are reading. Everybody's attention spans are diminishing. I've been told that right now publishing is tough. So I ended up going with a smaller press without an agent and was very pleased when I read that the average author sells about 300 books in a lifetime of that book, a smaller author. I thought, okay, I want to beat that. And I have at least tripled that and even more actually. And I feel like it is doing well. I'm not satisfied with it. I want it to keep growing. I've done a number of things to try to keep, marketing it because although I know it came out years ago, the average person doesn't know that because they've never heard of it. So it's a new release to them.
right, right. No, it's absolutely true, and I can say for anyone who's listening, the sort of commitment to marketing that you have to put in as an author is certainly something that took me by surprise, but you have to prepare for it and commit to it. That's about it, right? Um,
You do.
yeah. So, is there anything that you would consider something you tell yourself either to keep yourself going or maybe a little bit of self-deception, what I call the necessary lie, right? All writers have something that is about their process, themselves, or their own readers that is may not be entirely true, but you kind of need it to keep going. Do you have one, and what is it?
I I think I have two actually. I have one that's sort of negative and one that's positive. On the negative side, when I'm procrastinating, I tell myself I have plenty of time. I forget how old I am. I forget that some people start when they're 20 or 30. And I just say, there's always time. There's always time. If I'm, taking a 2-week vacation, I don't write, I give myself permission and grace. On the other side, I think I tell myself that each book is going to sell better than the last. I love what we do. But we don't make a heck of a lot of money. I think I make about $1.47 for every book that's sold. And if you
Correct.
figure I've sold about 1,000 to 1,500, and I've been doing this for a while now, I mean, we're not even making probably a penny an hour. So I think the fact that this is a passion project, but is also my career, that's where that little lie comes in, because it's not a hobby. And yet it is not a well-paying job yet either. But I keep telling myself that's coming. It will happen.
Right.
And that's that little lie.
Yeah, and that is probably the most universal lie across authors that we have to keep us going. Thank you. Those were my 6 questions. I personally found engaging with you both sort of really important for my own evolution as a writer, but as an author. And I differentiate the two because the writer is about the craft of writing. So, I love that you have the 2 points of view because you tell the story from both the husband and wife's perspective, right? And it's
Yes, I do.
very much like my story. And I remember early on, I had many points of view, and they tell you to write from a point of view. But I took courage in the fact that you had two, and I have 2 points of view.
Well, I'm glad. I'm glad.
Thank you. But also as an author, I think, you have spent the time to really understand what the levers of making your book successful looks like, right? What should your online presence be? What should your real life presence be? I do want you to talk a little bit about your the work you do with new authors, right? The sort of the should I describe it as a conference or tell us more?
So it was an idea that came to me when I first started marketing my book. And when I learned that as we were talking about earlier, it's really hard to get on the Today Show or hard to get a critic or anyone to notice your book, right? You have to literally knock on doors, pick up phones and say, hey, will you carry my book in your store? And I had to finesse a little bit. I went on tour with another author friend of ours, and we drove cross country. And when I was calling and making, everybody trying to get into the stores, I was getting sort of, well, you don't live around here. Why do we want your book? So I realized you have to come up with something. And it was really, really hard as a lesser known author. Right. And I came up with what I've called future famous authors. And for me, it's a movement. It's about getting the authors that write really well, that could sit on the shelf next to, the Stephen Kings or the Kristen Hannahs or the David Balducci's of the world, but don't, because it's so hard to break into that world. Those authors who are good enough, they need to be seen, they need to be read. So for me, it's about getting them read and also introducing readers to the best books they haven't heard of yet. And I started with a book club, which I am moving on to TikTok, actually. It's currently on Zoom, but I want to open it up to the larger public. And I am also trying to put together a readers retreat that I will do at least once a year, maybe twice a year, at sort of a bookish area. So the first one's going to be in Pennsylvania at the Book House Hotel. And, it takes us to bookstores. It's going to take us to that bookish hotel. We're going to do a panel dinner. But it's really just, for me, this movement is all about finding those authors who really deserve to be read and helping them get read.
That's amazing. And I really, the word that's used is it's like a mitzvah, right? It's like you giving back to this world of writing and authorship. But I applaud you. And JB, Jen, I thank you so much for taking the time to be part of my podcast, my show. It's really my own way of engaging, creating a platform that really shows the world the diversity of authors and writing out there. So thank you. And it's a true pleasure to call you my friend.
Thank you. And it's your mitzvah, right? You're giving back now that you're in the world. So thank you so much for allowing me to come on and speak with you. And I hope we will continue to share this world together.
Thank you.